An early 20th century philosopher and educationist gave us the concept of critical thinking in this 1910 book, How We Think. The author uses the term critical thinking interchangeably with reflective thinking, and he uses the term reflective more than critical because the broader point is the necessity of reflection before critiquing. To reflect is simply to stop and think, which is prior to any other consideration. The essence of critical thinking, according to How We Think, is simply to withhold judgment until you've made a thorough study of evidence to support that judgment. In other words, don't jump to conclusions, as your mother and my mother told us. How We Think describes thinking as taking place in 4 levels, from idle thought to reflective thought. Throughout life and throughout the day, even though we have the ability to think in more advanced ways, we continue to think at various times at one or the other of these levels of thought. And here they are, with my own embellishments added. The first level is idle thought, which is like passive, unguided daydreaming. Unbidden ideas float around and bump into each other like little motes of dust in a warm summer sunbeam. The second level is actively indulging your imagination without concerns for logic or making connections to reality. Like a child at play, creating scenarios without regard to their possibility or impossibility. The third level involves the embrace of judgments and opinions without seriously examining them. You choose your judgments and opinions and beliefs according to how they make you feel. They're unanalyzed ideas that get sorted into categories like pleasant, unpleasant, important, unimportant. And these are the ideas that are ready for quick deployment. The fourth level, reflective thinking, is, quoting How We Think, active, persistent, and careful consideration of any belief or knowledge in the light of the grounds that support it. So with reflective thinking, ideas are individually analyzed and verified or discarded according to available evidence. You'll notice that each successive level requires more energy and more attention. Daydreaming is easy. Using your imagination is fun, and espousing opinions piques your emotions, but reflective thinking requires more work. For most of us, most of the time, our thinking is on the first, second, and third levels, bumped along by emotional impulses. The fourth level of reflective thinking we usually reserve for situations like work, study, research, or serious arguments. All of those situations involve emotion, of course, because at root, all thinking begins with emotion. But at the level of reflective thinking, emotional propositions are challenged and filtered by factual propositions, which is to say, reflective thinking is usually reserved for situations in which we need to think before we speak. But it's a more comfortable operating procedure to speak without thinking. And that's pretty much level 3. The habit of espousing opinions without seriously examining them. This is generally how we make sense of the world. We engage in casual discussions and we react emotionally to ideas at this level. So, how do we end up with this habit of holding certain opinions dear without ever questioning them? It goes like this. To say you think for yourself is not so straightforward, not only because, in a technical sense, most of our opinions are based on hearsay and not firsthand experience, but also because we're social creatures to whom sharing a common focus, common opinions, and common views is worth more than the work it takes to independently analyze those opinions. Common or socially approved belief is pretty much standard operating procedure if you want to appear to be good and competent in most social situations. Never underestimate the power of valuing an opinion or an experience, not merely for its own sake, but valuing it because you know others are thinking or experiencing it too. What we're doing with this sharing of common experiences is developing clusters of shared tastes, beliefs, and opinions, which we can sum up as attitudes. It's interaction with peers that's a key source of attitudes. There's a certain stage in our childhood development around puberty, the stressful time, in which we try to find our place among our peers. It's when being popular and knowing what's new and cool becomes very important. And we really start to value our friend groups at this time. For some kids, it's all consuming. And for some, it barely matters. But most kids, whether they like it or not, will feel the pressure to fit in and to find their place among their peers and learn to reflect the accepted attitudes towards the world, which are held mostly by the aforementioned good and competent gatekeepers in your social bubble. Right or wrong, you generally don't take the time to question certain things because you reckon it's what others are thinking anyway, and they've probably already done the heavy lifting of looking up the facts and evidence and all of that. But that's mental laziness, and mental laziness is just one of the obstacles in the way of reflective thinking. You might wonder, if going along to get along and thinking on a shallow emotional level is enough to get by in the world, why should you bother doing all the work that it takes to become a reflective thinker? Well, let me put it this way. Imagine if your 4 levels of thinking were embodied in 4 characters: a daydreaming toddler, an imaginative kindergartner, an emotionally driven middle school student, or a fully rational adult. Who would you put in charge? Before I state the obvious, I'd say that each of these characters is valuable, indispensable even. The rational adult will tell you that you should gain as much knowledge and understanding as possible. The imaginative kindergartner will use all of your ideas like Legos or Tinker Toys and explore new connections and creative possibilities with them. Meanwhile, the daydreaming toddler churns ideas over in your subconscious in random ways you wouldn't even imagine, working out stresses and strains you didn't even know needed working out. And then level 3, the social emotional adolescent, will use all of this learning to apply to the wisdom of getting along with people and being a more desirable person on the social stage. But somebody has to be in charge. Somebody has to steer the ship and make all the final judgments and decisions. Somebody has to do the active, persistent, careful reflection and pay attention. And that's work. But any work becomes more easy with practice, and especially if you start young. Before you voice your opinion, make a judgment, make a decision, or comment on an Instagram post, stop and think. Even fools are thought wise if they keep silent.